Imagine being an exec at Disney, being handed the soundtrack to Frozen and saying, "Let's just give this away." That's exactly what happened at Sony. Sony gave away the movie distribution rights for K-Pop Demon Hunters to Netflix for pocket change. But surely they must be making money off the soundtrack, right? I mean, the album's on fire and everyone's listening to it. Well, no. It turns out that Sony gave away the music distribution rights to Republic Records. In an act of savage betrayal, the very person that Sony brought in to help them get their foot in the door of the K-pop industry ended up landing the deal to distribute one of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time. It's a story so wild you won't believe it. And the craziest part? It was Sony's own people who created this masterpiece. It all started with one woman, Spring Aspers, the president of Sony Pictures Music Group. She was one of the architects of the Spider-Verse music phenomenon. This time, she was given an even bigger challenge. Build the soundtrack for a brand new, untested movie, K-Pop Demon Hunters. Her task? The songs had to sound like legit K-pop songs, but also had to push the story forward, like a traditional musical. This combination had never been done before. But a lifetime of experience had prepared her for this moment. Spring didn't just hire a few composers and call it a day. She spent 5 years building a dream team of world-class musical talent. Teddy Park from the Black Label, hitmakers like Jenna Andrews, Lindgren, Stephen Kirk, Mark Sonnenblick, and executive music producer Ian Eisendrath. Piece by piece, she crafted a brilliant album. On paper, Sony had all the ingredients to dominate the charts. But here's the thing. While Spring and her team were cooking up global hits, Sony itself had no idea just how valuable this soundtrack was about to become. And that's where things took a surprising turn. While Spring was building the next cultural earthquake, Sony execs dismissed it as a quirky side project. Despite all of the talent packed into the soundtrack, Sony couldn't see that it was really a golden ticket. Behind the scenes, whispers in the industry painted K-Pop Demon Hunters as a niche project. A weird experiment, maybe fun, but not blockbuster material. Some execs even thought the music would struggle to break through outside of the movie. Spring knew the songs had potential, but she also knew the world of K-pop runs on authenticity. To make this project undeniable, she wanted more than polished tracks. She wanted a real K-pop group to give the soundtrack legitimacy, a stamp of industry approval that would silence the doubters. And that's when she reached out to someone with the exact connections Sony didn't have. Enter Savan Kotecha. Savan who? If you don't know the name, you definitely know the hits. He's a 46-year-old, Grammy and Oscar-nominated American songwriter and producer behind chart toppers for Usher, Ariana Grande, The Weeknd, One Direction, and even K-pop giants. Collectively, his songs have had billions of streams, just insane numbers. After decades of feeding other artists #1 hits, he launched his own label earlier this year, Visva Records, and formed a joint venture with Republic Records. Spring already knew Savan well. They crossed paths during her work on other Sony Pictures animation projects, and she trusted his instincts. Savan had one thing that Sony desperately needed: a direct line into the K-pop universe. And not just any line. He had ties to Twice, one of the biggest girl groups in the world. When Spring called, Savan didn't hesitate. This is the moment the story flipped, because he saw what Sony couldn't. After hanging up with Spring, Savan's first call was to Twice. But would Twice take his call? He had worked on 3 of their songs and had a working relationship with their label, JYP Entertainment. And just like his startup label Visva, JYP also had a contractual relationship with Republic Records. So, there are reasons, he thought, that Twice might be receptive. Twice is a 9-member K-pop girl group formed by JYP Entertainment in 2015, and they're one of the most successful acts in K-pop history. The group is made up of members from South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, which gives them a unique international appeal with a loyal fan base. They're such a big name in Korea, so it wasn't clear if they'd bite, but they replied with an enthusiastic yes. The very first track of the album is a cover for the song Takedown. It's sung by 3 of the members from Twice, Jonghyun, Jiyo, and Chaeyoung. Their version of Take Down plays during the end credits of the movie along with video clips of their recording sessions. In addition, the 2024 song Strategy by Twice is track 5 on the soundtrack. With these 2 tracks, Sony cemented the K-pop street cred that they craved. But as it turned out, the hardest part wasn't getting Twice to say yes. The hardest part was what came next. With Twice on board and a powerhouse lineup of producers, songwriters, and singers, the soundtrack should have been a slam dunk for Sony Music. But when it came time to release it, Sony Music shocked everyone. They passed. Before you say anything, let's hold up a sec and get a 30,000-foot view for some context. The music industry is dominated by the big 3 major record labels: Universal Music Group, or UMG, Sony Music Group, or Sony Music, and Warner Music Group, who are all fierce rivals. Of the 3, UMG is the largest. Republic Records falls under UMG, and Savan's tiny label Visva has a joint venture with Republic Records. Sony Music falls under Sony Entertainment, as does Sony Pictures Motion Picture Group, which I will refer to as Sony Movies. Under Sony Movies is Sony Pictures Animation and Sony Pictures Music Group. Spring Aspers is the president of Sony Pictures Music Group, not Sony Music. They sound similar, but Sony Music is a completely separate division. Spring is responsible for producing the soundtrack for movies. On the other hand, Sony Music is an old-school record publisher and distributor for some of the biggest artists on the planet. In a perfect world, Spring would create the soundtrack for movies, and then Sony Music would distribute it. But, like other big labels, Sony Music looks down on movie soundtracks as quote-unquote not real music. The executives at Sony Music listened to the K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack and decided it wasn't worth the gamble. Too niche, too risky, too uncertain. And Sony Music wasn't alone. Other major labels quietly turned it down too, not realizing they were staring at the next Frozen moment. That left the door wide open for Savan. Savan isn't your ordinary suit in the music business. He's from a new generation of artists who understand global pop culture, a digital world free from regional gatekeepers. Since he was launching a new label, he was hungry for a new album. When he heard the K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack, he immediately understood what the suits at Sony couldn't comprehend. This was a soundtrack that would appeal to both kids and adults. It would appeal to both women and men. It would appeal to both K-pop fans and non-K-pop fans. It wasn't an album. It was a unicorn. But he didn't tell this to Sony. And by this twist of fate, Sony had inadvertently let the fox into the henhouse. The very person they brought in to help them get into the world of K-pop turned out to be the person who would walk away with their unicorn. When the big labels turned down the deal, Savan stepped in. Even though his label, Visva Records, is brand new, his joint venture with Republic gave him the distribution muscle to swoop in. And just like that, Sony's own creation slipped through their fingers and landed in the lap of their rival. And when release day finally came, the world realized just how massive a mistake Sony had made. On June 20th, K-pop Demon Hunters dropped on Netflix, and everything that Sony had dismissed turned into a global frenzy. Overnight, the soundtrack took off. As of this recording, singles from the K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack hold the top 4 positions on Spotify's Top 50 USA chart, with Golden, Your Idol, Soda Pop, and How It's Done. In total, their singles hold 7 of the top 10 positions, with What It Sounds Like, Takedown, and Free rounding out the other 3. The single Golden, sung by the fictitious girl group Huntrix, voiced by EJ, Audrey, Nuna, and Ray Ami, peaked at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming the first K-pop girl group to ever do it, and the first girl group of any genre to do it in 24 years. Republic Records CEO Jim Rappo couldn't believe it. He compared the moment to Frozen. Only this time, it wasn't just one breakout track. The entire album was on fire. Fans weren't just watching the movie, they were living in its music, streaming it on loop, pushing it higher every day. The smash hits turned Savan's tiny label into a multi-million-dollar brand overnight. Meanwhile, Sony had to watch from the sidelines as their own creation and 5 years of work made Savan rich. The success should have been Sony's victory lap, but instead, it turned into a humiliation. For Sony, it wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was a public reminder of how badly they had miscalculated. But the question now is, what happens next? Now that K-Pop Demon Hunters has become a full-blown phenomenon, the question insiders are whispering about is, what happens next? Because one thing is certain, no one wants to miss out on the money a second time. Behind closed doors, there are talks of live concert spin-offs, pop-up events, even a Demon Hunters musical. Republic and Visva are already brainstorming ideas with Netflix, figuring out how to stretch this soundtrack beyond the screen. Imagine Twice performing side by side with Huntrix or a hologram stage show with the Saja Boys. Nothing is off the table. And then there's Sony Music. After watching Republic walk away with the bag, industry chatter says Sony won't be so quick to outsource next time. Some say they're already drawing up new contract terms, making sure that if another animated hit goes viral, the profits stay in-house. But there's also speculation about the artists themselves. With Huntrix and the Saja Boys turning into real charting acts, insiders wonder, will they negotiate direct deals with labels instead of just tying themselves to soundtracks? Could fictional bands actually end up with real-world record contracts? One thing's for sure, the old rules of movie music just got torn up. In the end, the story of K-Pop Demon Hunters is bigger than just a movie or a soundtrack. It's the story of how Sony built the house, decorated every room, and then handed the keys to someone else. Spring Aspers spent 5 years assembling the perfect lineup of writers, producers, and global talent. But when it came time to bet on themselves, Sony blinked. And that hesitation handed their rivals at Republic the crown jewel of 2025. Now, Visva and Republic are rewriting the playbook for Hollywood soundtracks, while Sony is left watching their own creation dominate the charts without them. The irony couldn't be sharper. The music they dismissed as too niche has become a global phenomenon, one they no longer control. Sony is determined not to make this mistake again. But the real question is, will they ever get another chance?